Today, we're talking about the story of a national hero who became a national tragedy. We're looking at Ignatius Acheampong of Ghana, a leader whose vision for a self-reliant nation was so powerful that, for a little while, it actually worked. But his story is also a chilling reminder of how a dream of greatness can just completely collapse into ruin.
So when Colonel Acheampong seized power in a bloodless coup back in 1972, these were his words. Now, to really get their power, you have to picture Ghana at the time. It was struggling with debt, struggling with foreign influence. So this wasn't just some political speech. It was a genuine promise of hope, pride, and a brand new beginning for a nation just desperate for change.
And yet, just 7 years later, he was executed by firing squad. The legacy he left behind wasn't greatness at all. It was economic collapse and corruption on a massive scale. So that's the real question here, isn't it? How does a leader with such a bold vision for his country's future end up being the very one who destroys it? All right, let's get into it. To understand how it all went so wrong, we have to start with the initial vision, that promise Acheampong made when he first took power. His military government, which was called the National Redemption Council, wasn't just talking about stability. No, they were promising a full-on revolution. They declared an economic war on poverty. They talked about dignity, equity, and a total transformation of Ghana. I mean, this was an incredibly bold vision. And this vision wasn't just talk. It was immediately translated into some of the most radical economic policies Africa had ever seen. And it was all built on one powerful idea: self-reliance. And the centerpiece of this whole policy was Yentua. In the Twi language, it literally means, "we will not pay." I mean, just think about how radical that was. Acheampong's government simply refused to pay back foreign debts that they saw as corrupt. It was a direct challenge to the entire Western financial system. And this defiance wasn't just a slogan, it was a real strategy. First, Operation Feed Yourself. The plan was to grow all food locally and completely cut the country's reliance on expensive imports. Then you had Operation Feed Your Industries, to supply local factories with local materials like cotton. And finally, they took control, securing a majority stake in foreign-owned companies. It was a complete, top-to-bottom plan for self-reliance. And here's the crazy part. At first, it actually worked. Within 2 years, Acheampong's policies had flipped a massive trade deficit into a surplus of over $200 million. Get this, Ghana was even exporting rice. For a brief moment, the revolution felt real. But that promising start, it just didn't last. The dream of self-reliance began to completely unravel, crushed by a combination of global events and, well, a deep rot from within. The 1973 global oil crisis was the first major blow. It jacked up the price of pretty much everything Ghana needed to import. Then, the price of cocoa, their main source of foreign money, became totally unstable. To cope, the government just printed more money, and that led to runaway inflation. As the official economy collapsed, a shadow economy took its place, and Ghanaians had a name for it: Kalabule. This wasn't just some technical term, it was the word on the street for the culture of hoarding, black market deals, and systemic corruption that basically came to define daily life. And this is where the hypocrisy becomes just undeniable. The slogan was one nation, one people. But the reality was nepotism, with the Acheampong's own cousins in power. The promise of self-reliance, it devolved into Kalabule, and the vow of dignity, it became a cynical joke. The regime was nicknamed Fawoto Begay Gulf, which roughly translates to bring your backside for a gulf, a direct, nasty reference to officials trading Volkswagen cars for sexual favors. So, with the economy in ruins and the regime's hypocrisy on full display, the very foundations of Acheampong's power began to crumble. His final gamble was a political proposal he called Unigov, which was basically a way to make military rule permanent. And that was the last straw. Suddenly, everyone from lawyers and students to his own former generals were united against him. They were all demanding an end to his rule. A year before his downfall, a former military head of state, General Afrifa, sent Acheampong this chillingly prophetic warning. He basically feared the public's anger was becoming so intense that it would demand their blood. And Afrifa's warning came true. First, in 1978, Acheampong was removed by his own generals in a palace coup. But that wasn't the end. A year later, a fiery junior officer named Jerry Rawlings led a popular uprising that just swept the country. Acheampong was arrested, and just a few days later, he was executed by firing squad.
Even in his final moments, this paradox remained. His last message to the world, delivered through his daughter, was simple: tell everybody I was a good man and pray for me. How do you even begin to reconcile that with everything that happened? And this really brings us to the core of his story. How do we remember a leader who began with such a clear, patriotic vision, but whose rule ended in such complete and utter disaster? And that leaves us with this. Does the initial vision of a leader like Acheampong, that dream of self-reliance and national pride, does it matter at all when the final reality is one of corruption, ruin, and execution? It's a question that echoes through history, far, far beyond the borders of Ghana.